cafeteria at Fort Braxton buzzed with the usual morning chatter until the moment everything went silent. A sickening thud echoed through the space as Rachel Torres hit the floor, her breakfast tray exploding a spray of scrambled eggs and orange juice. Colonel Marcus Webb's polished boot pinned her sandwich to the linoleum like he was crushing an insect. "On your knees already?" he sneered, towering over her with the satisfaction of a predator who'd found easy prey. Around them, phones slid out silently, recording every second of the humiliation. Rachel didn't flinch, didn't speak. Her hands moved with deliberate precision, gathering scattered utensils as if nothing had happened. Laughter erupted from Webb's usual crowd of admirers. "This," he announced, spreading his arms wide for his audience, "is what happens when princesses play soldier." The silence that followed felt heavy, pregnant with tension. Then, from somewhere in the back of the cafeteria, a voice cut through the air like a blade. "You really don't remember her, do you?" Webb turned, his smirk faltering. Slightly. From the shadows near the coffee station, a figure stepped forward. Not a cadet, not a regular soldier, but someone whose bearing suggested they'd seen things most people couldn't imagine. The stranger's eyes fixed on the dog tags hanging from Rachel's neck as she bent to clean up the mess. The worn metal caught. The fluorescent light, revealing 3 distinct numbers etched deep into the surface. 847. A passing general paused at the cafeteria entrance, his eyes narrowing as he glimpsed those numbers. His face transformed in an instant, recognition flashing across his weathered features, followed by something that looked remarkably like shock. Rachel didn't notice his reaction. She was too focused on maintaining her composure, her movements, precise and practiced, as if she'd endured this kind of humiliation countless times before. The general's hand tightened on the doorframe. Without a word, he turned and walked away, pulling out his phone with sudden urgency. Rachel Torres lived in apartment 847 on Pine Street, a modest one-bedroom unit 3 miles from Fort Braxton, the kind of place where thin walls meant hearing neighbors argue at 2 in the morning and the hot water ran out after 10 minutes. Her 1998 Honda Civic sat in the parking lot, rust creeping along the wheel wells, the odometer showing 237,000 miles of faithful service. Every morning, at exactly 8-40-7, her alarm sounded, though she was always awake before it rang. The routine never varied. Black coffee, wheat toast with peanut butter, a 5-minute shower where she never removed her dog tags, not even when the metal grew cold against her skin. At the base medical facility, she moved through her duties like a ghost. Other medics barely registered her presence. She was just that quiet blonde girl who took the night shifts nobody else wanted, who handled the difficult patients others avoided. Her colleagues didn't notice how she touched her dog tags throughout the day, an unconscious habit repeated exactly 847 times between sunrise and sunset. They didn't see how she deliberately chose apartment 847, or how she kept exactly $847 in loose change in her car's console. These weren't coincidences. They were ritual remembrance, a weight she carried in worn metal against her chest. The apartment told its own story in what was missing rather than what was there. No mirrors faced the bed. She couldn't stand seeing her reflection first thing in the morning. An emergency bag sat packed by the door, ready for evacuation at a moment's notice. Long sleeves hid the network of scars mapping her hands and forearms, old wounds that had healed badly in places without proper medical care. Her bookshelf held medical textbooks with sand still trapped in their spines, pages marked with notes written in places like Kandahar and Fallujah, remote forward operating bases whose names never made the news. Rachel spoke softly when she spoke. At all, but patients trusted her implicitly. There was something in her blue eyes that seemed older than her 28 years, a depth of understanding that made wounded soldiers relax under her care. At the animal shelter, where she volunteered on weekends, dogs with histories of abuse gravitated toward her corner of the kennel. She sat with them for hours, her scarred hands gentle as she coaxed them to eat, to trust, to believe that not all humans brought pain. The other volunteers marveled at her patience, not knowing that she saw herself in every frightened creature that flinched from sudden movements. Her medical skills bordered on supernatural, a photographic memory for procedures, an ability to diagnose conditions other medics missed, hands that remained steady even when, no, that wasn't right. There were no shells here. This was Fort Braxton, not Helmand Province. Sometimes the memories blurred together, past and present colliding in moments of exhaustion. She drank her coffee black because cream and sugar had been luxuries in the field. She ate simple meals because military rations had trained her palate for basic sustenance. She slept 4 to 5 hours maximum because in combat zones, those who slept too deeply didn't wake up at all. Late one Tuesday night, her phone rang. The number showed unknown, but she answered anyway. A voice spoke a single word, 8-4-7. Rachel listened to the silence that followed, her breathing steady and controlled. After 30 seconds, she hung up without saying anything. Her fingers found the dog tags, tracing those 3 numbers etched into metal. 8, 4, 7. Each digit worn smooth by countless touches. Each number carrying the weight of something far heavier than its mathematical value. What she didn't know was that Colonel Webb's campaign against her was about to begin in earnest. What she also didn't know was that someone with enough authority to stop him was finally starting to pay attention. Colonel Webb's assault on Rachel began the very next morning with the precision of a military operation. He assigned her to latrine duty during peak medical hours, claiming it would build character and teach humility. The other medics exchanged uncomfortable glances, but said nothing. Webb had connections, influence, and a reputation for destroying careers over perceived slights. Rachel reported to the restrooms without complaint, her medical expertise wasted on porcelain and industrial cleanser, while patients waited longer for inferior care. As she scrubbed toilets, she could hear the controlled chaos of the medical bay down the hall, understaffed and overwhelmed without her steady presence. Sergeant Jennifer Blake, a fellow medic who'd worked alongside Rachel for 2 years, watched the injustice unfold with growing anger. During their brief coffee break, she cornered Rachel in the supply closet. "This is insane," Jennifer whispered, glancing around to make sure they weren't overheard. "You're the best medic on this base. Yesterday, you diagnosed that kid's appendicitis, when Dr. Martinez missed it completely. Now you're cleaning bathrooms?" Rachel's fingers found her dog tags, tracing the numbers in that familiar pattern. "Colonel Webb has his reasons. His reasons are garbage, and you know it." Jennifer's voice carried the frustration of someone watching talent being wasted. "Why didn't you fight back? File a complaint? Talk to someone higher up?" "Because fighting back just makes things worse," Rachel replied quietly. "Trust me on that." But Jennifer didn't trust her on that. She'd seen too many good soldiers destroyed by petty tyrants who mistook cruelty for leadership. That evening, she made a decision that would change everything. The second week brought public humiliation during morning formation. Webb singled Rachel out in front of visiting Pentagon officials, his voice carrying across the parade ground as 300 soldiers stood at attention, forced to witness her degradation. "Soldiers like Torres here represent everything wrong with modern military standards," he announced, his tone dripping with disdain. "Too soft, too emotional, too weak for the demands of real service. She can't even defend herself against basic criticism." The visiting officials took notes, their faces impassive. Rachel stood perfectly still, her eyes fixed on a point somewhere beyond the horizon. But those closest to her noticed a telltale sign. her fingers moving against her chest, tracing those 3 numbers through her uniform. By the 3rd week, Webb removed her from critical patient care entirely, relegating her to filing paperwork in a windowless basement office. The forms blurred together, requisitions, supply requests, bureaucratic minutiae that any clerk could handle. Her hands that had once performed emergency surgery in combat zones now pushed papers while soldiers suffered upstairs. The isolation was deliberate, calculated. Webb understood that breaking someone like Rachel required more than just humiliation. It required complete separation from purpose, from the work that gave her life meaning. But he underestimated the loyalty of those who'd worked beside her. Jennifer Blake wasn't the only one who noticed. Master Sergeant Robert Hayes, the facility's senior medic, began documenting every slight, every wasted hour, every patient who waited longer because Rachel wasn't available. He'd been in the military for 22 years and had seen plenty of officers who confused authority with tyranny. "Something's not right about this," he told Jennifer during a quiet moment in the supply room. "Torres is too good to be treated like this, and there's something off about him. The way he talks about combat, about real service. I've been checking his record." Jennifer leaned closer. "What did you find?" "Nothing. That's the problem. 22 years of service, and I can't find a single combat deployment. Not one." Makes you wonder why he's so determined to prove Torres isn't tough enough. Week 4 saw Webb spreading poisonous rumors through the command structure. He whispered about emotional instability, suggested she might be a liability, questioned her mental fitness for duty. The lies spread like infection through the base hierarchy, each retelling adding new details, new doubts about the quiet medic who never defended herself. But the rumors had an unintended consequence. They reached the ears of someone who'd been quietly investigating Rachel's background since that moment in the cafeteria, when she glimpsed those 3 numbers on her dog tags. General Patricia Hayes arrived at Fort Braxton on a rain-soaked Thursday morning, her transfer orders citing administrative reorganization. But those who knew her understood that Patricia Hayes didn't get transferred. She got deployed to fix problems that others couldn't handle. She carried herself with the bearing of someone who'd seen real combat, whose ribbons told stories of decisions made under fire. Her first week was spent in marathon sessions, reviewing personnel files until her office light was the last one burning in headquarters. Rachel's file drew her attention immediately. Too many redactions, too many blank spaces where service history should be. When Webb attempted to intercept her inquiry, dismissing Rachel as an administrative error and suggesting her file contained clerical mistakes from rushed wartime documentation, Hayes' instincts sharpened. She'd spent 30 years reading between the lines, recognizing when someone was trying to bury the truth. During an emergency drill, Hayes positioned herself where she could observe Rachel's performance. What she saw made her sit up and take notice. Rachel's hands moved with practiced efficiency, anticipating complications before they arose, remaining calm while others panicked. Her medical knowledge was encyclopedic, her diagnostic skills nearly supernatural. This wasn't the work of someone who'd spent her career filing paperwork. That night, General Hayes accessed classified databases from her secure terminal, entering authorization codes that few possessed. What she found made her lean back in her chair, her coffee growing cold, as she absorbed the implications. Rachel Torres wasn't just an ordinary medic. She was a living legend who'd been deliberately buried in bureaucracy and humiliation. The screen glowed with restricted information. Operation Silent Angel, deployment dates that overlapped with some of the war's bloodiest battles, a unit designation that made Hayes' breath catch in her throat. 847 Medical Response Team. The pieces were falling into place, but Hayes needed more information before she could act. She needed to understand not just what Rachel had done, but why she was allowing Webb to destroy her without fighting back. What she discovered would change everything. Webb's attacks intensified with vicious creativity, as he sensed his opportunity to permanently neutralize what he saw as a threat to his authority. During a packed staff meeting, he held up Rachel's personnel file like evidence in a trial, waving it before 20 senior officers. "This is what happens when we lower standards," he declared, his voice rising with theatrical indignation. "Soldiers like Torres are too soft for real military service. She can't handle criticism, can't defend herself, can't even maintain proper military bearing under pressure." The room bristled with discomfort, but Webb had spent years cultivating an atmosphere of fear. His cronies nodded in agreement while others studied their hands, unwilling to challenge someone with his connections. Rachel sat through it all without visible reaction, but her colleagues noticed the unconscious tell. Her fingers found the dog tags more frequently now, tracing those numbers like a rosary, like a prayer, like an anchor to something beyond this petty humiliation. "I'm recommending immediate transfer to permanent desk duty," Webb continued, "where she can't endanger anyone with her weakness. The military has no place for soldiers who crumble under basic leadership." During moments of peak stress, when Webb's voice rose to a crescendo, those sitting closest to Rachel caught fragments of something she whispered under her breath. 847, 847, repeated like a mantra, like a ward against the poison Webb was spreading. The breaking point came during another confrontation in the medical bay. Webb grabbed Rachel's arm as she tried to pass, his grip tight enough to bruise. "I'm talking to you, princess," he snarled, but the words died in his throat. Rachel's body moved without conscious thought. A lightning-fast defensive position, weight shifted, free hand position to strike. The transformation lasted less than a second before she forcibly relaxed, stepping back with a mumbled apology. Webb didn't even realize what had happened, too. Caught up in his own performance to notice how close he'd come to something dangerous. But General Hayes watched from the doorway, having arrived to investigate a supply discrepancy. She saw Rachel's reaction, saw the controlled violence that had flickered to life and been immediately suppressed. More importantly, she saw Rachel's. Fingers immediately returned to those dog tags, tracing 847 like chains holding something back. That evening, Hayes made her decision. It was time for the truth to come out. The confrontation took place in Hayes's private office, dust motes dancing through afternoon sunlight as she closed the door and engaged the security locks. Rachel stood at attention, her face carefully neutral, but Hayes could see the tension in her shoulders. "I know about the 847, Hayes said simply, and watched Rachel's careful composure crack like ice under spring sun. The general continued, her voice gentle but insistent. "Operation Silent Angel. The 847 Medical Response Team. 72 hours behind enemy lines. 847 coalition and civilian lives saved under impossible conditions." Each word landed like a physical blow. Rachel's hands clutched the dog tags, hard enough to leave impressions in her palms. "You want to know about 8-4-7? Rachel's voice emerged raw, unused to carrying this weight aloud. "It's not just a number. It's First Lieutenant Jackson, who would have bled out from shrapnel wounds if we hadn't gotten there in time. It's the Afghan translator's daughter, who survived because we had antibiotics. It's Private Coleman, who lost his legs but kept his life." Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. 847 faces. 847 names. 847 families who got their loved ones back. The words came faster now, years of suppressed memory pouring out like water through a broken dam. "And it's the 6 members of my team who didn't make it out, who died making sure those 847 lived. The numbers on my tags aren't serial numbers, General. They're a memorial, They're a promise. They're all I have left of them." Hayes listened as Rachel described the ambush that ended Operation Silent Angel. Enemy forces closing in, ammunition running low, evacuation helicopters still hours away. Her team had made the choice that medics sometimes face: stay with the wounded or save themselves. They'd formed a protective circle around the aid station. 6 medics with rifles they rarely used, holding the line while Rachel performed surgery after surgery, transfusion after transfusion, keeping the wounded stable until help arrived. When the helicopters finally touched down, Rachel was the only medic still breathing, surrounded by 847 living patients and 6 dead colleagues who had given everything to honor their oath. "That's why I stay quiet," Rachel continued, her fingers never leaving the dog tags. "Because they call me a hero, but heroes don't let their team die. Heroes don't survive when better people fall. I'm not soft, General. I'm just tired of being congratulated for living when they died." She took a shuddering breath before continuing. "Every day I touch these tags 847 times. Once for each life saved. It's not obsession. It's remembrance. It's the only way I know to honor them, to carry them forward, to make their sacrifice mean something beyond medals and ceremonies they'll never attend." Hayes wanted to argue, to explain survivors' guilt, to mandate therapy, to announce Rachel's heroism from every loudspeaker on base. But she recognized the particular weight that some soldiers carry, not the weight of what they did, but of what they survived. "Your secret is safe," she promised, "but Webb needs to stop. I can handle that quietly if you prefer." Rachel nodded, already retreating into herself, but Hayes wasn't finished. "Those 847 people, Sergeant Torres, they're living their lives because of you and your team. That matters. Whether you accept recognition or not, that matters." What Hayes didn't tell Rachel was that her investigation had uncovered something else. Webb had discovered fragments of their conversation through his network of informants, but he misunderstood everything. He assumed Rachel had been making complaints, pulling strings, using connections to undermine him. His paranoia was transforming into rage, and rage into plans for a final public confrontation that would destroy one of them completely: the base. Inspection scheduled for the following week would provide perfect cover. Pentagon officials, media representatives, hundreds of witnesses gathered for a formal ceremony. Webb saw his opportunity and was preparing to seize it with both hands, unaware that he was about to detonate his own career in the most spectacular way possible. Webb's paranoia reached a fever pitch as he prepared for what he saw as the ultimate confrontation. He spent his evenings in his office, door locked, phone pressed to his ear as he called in favors and consolidated support from his network of allies. "She's been working behind the scenes," he told Colonel Marcus Reed, his longtime friend at the Pentagon. "Playing the victim, manipulating the command structure. I have it on good authority she's been feeding lies to Hayes about my leadership style." Reed's voice crackled through the secure line. "What kind of lies?" "The usual feminist nonsense. Claims of harassment, unfair treatment, hostile work environment. You know how these types operate. They can't handle real military standards, so they cry discrimination." What Webb didn't know was that Reed had served 2 tours in Afghanistan and had heard whispers about a legendary medical unit that had performed miracles under impossible conditions. He'd also heard that the only survivor of that unit had disappeared into the administrative machinery of the military, her heroism deliberately buried to protect operational security. "Marcus," Reed said carefully, "what exactly do you know about Torres's background?" "Nothing worth knowing. Desk jockey with delusions of grandeur. Probably bought those dog tags at a surplus store to impress people." The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough to make Webb uncomfortable. "You there, Reed?" "Yeah, I'm here." "Marcus, maybe you should reconsider this confrontation. Some fights aren't worth having. But Webb was too far gone to hear the warning in his friend's voice. He'd convinced himself that Rachel represented everything wrong with modern military standards, and he was determined to make an example of her. Meanwhile, Jennifer Blake and Master Sergeant Hayes had been conducting their own investigation. Jennifer's computer skills, honed during her previous career as an IT specialist, had proven invaluable in piecing together fragments of classified information. "Look at this," she told Hayes, pointing to her screen. "I've been cross-referencing deployment dates, unit designations, and casualty reports. 847 Medical Response Team shows up in a lot of after-action reports, but always with heavy redactions." Hayes studied the documents, his 22 years of experience helping him read between the lines. These are normal medical unit reports. Look at the language. Unprecedented life-saving operations, extraordinary conditions, heroic sacrifice. This is the kind of language reserved for Medal of Honor citations. "There's more," Jennifer continued, pulling up another file. "I found a partial personnel roster. 6 names listed as KIA, 1 survivor. The survivor's name is redacted, but the date matches Rachel's transfer to administrative duties." Hayes leaned back in his chair, the pieces falling into place. "So she's not just a good medic. She's a legend," Jennifer finished. "A living legend who's been buried in paperwork and humiliation because Webb can't recognize what's right in front of him." They worked through the night, gathering evidence, building a case that would protect Rachel when Webb finally showed his hand. Because they both knew he would, men like Webb couldn't resist the temptation to destroy what they didn't understand. General Hayes spent her evenings in her quarters, making secure phone calls to colleagues in Washington. The conversations were brief, coded, but their meaning was clear. She was calling in favors, mobilizing resources, preparing for a battle that would determine more than just one soldier's career. "Patricia," said General Morrison, her voice tight with concern, "are you certain about this? If you're wrong, if Torres isn't who you think she is." "I'm not wrong, David. I've seen the classified files. Operation Silent Angel was real, and she was there. The question is whether we're going to let some petty tyrant destroy a genuine hero because he's too small to recognize greatness." Morrison's sigh carried across the encrypted connection. "What do you need? Just be ready. When this goes down, it's going to be public, and it's going to be ugly. Webb's planning something for the inspection ceremony, and I want to be prepared." "How prepared?" "Full disclosure prepared. If he wants to make this about her service record, then we'll give him exactly what he's asking for." Rachel, unaware of the storm building around her, continued her quiet routine. She worked her shifts, endured Webb's harassment, and counted out her daily ritual of 847 touches to her dog tags. Each touch was a name, a face, a life that continued because of decisions made in a dusty aid station half a world away. But something was changing. The other medics had begun to notice the way she worked, the calm competence under pressure, the encyclopedic knowledge that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than textbooks. They started asking her advice, seeking her input on difficult cases. Webb noticed too, and it infuriated him. Even relegated to menial tasks, she was still commanding respect, still demonstrating the kind of quiet authority that made his theatrical leadership style look petty by comparison. The final straw came when Private Johnson, a 19-year-old from Ohio, suffered a severe allergic reaction during a routine training exercise. The base physician was off duty, the emergency response team was delayed, and Johnson was going into anaphylactic shock. Rachel was mopping floors in the medical bay when she heard the commotion. Without hesitation, she dropped her mop and took charge, her hands moving with practiced precision as she administered epinephrine and established an airway. Her calm commands organized the chaos, her steady presence keeping everyone focused on saving Johnson's life. When the crisis was over, when Johnson was breathing normally, and the emergency team finally arrived, Webb found her cleaning up the medical supplies with the same methodical care she brought to mopping floors. "You had no authority to intervene," he snarled, his face flushed with rage. "You're not assigned to medical duties. You overstepped your bounds." Rachel looked up at him with those steady blue eyes. "Private Johnson would have died. That's not your concern anymore. It's always my concern." The simplicity of her response, the quiet certainty in her voice, made Webb realize that no amount of harassment was going to break her. She would continue to be what she was, a healer, a protector, a soldier who understood service in ways he never would. That night, he made his final plans. The base inspection would be his stage, the gathered officials his audience. It would expose Rachel Torres as the fraud he knew her to be, once and for all. What he didn't know was that General Hayes had made her own plans, and that the truth he was so determined to bury was about to explode into the light with the force of a bomb. The morning of the base inspection dawned clear and crisp, the kind of perfect military weather that made ceremonies memorable. Pentagon officials arrived in convoy, their black SUVs glinting in the early sunlight. Media representatives set up their equipment around the main courtyard, preparing to document what they expected to be a routine display of military efficiency. Webb stood before his bathroom mirror, adjusting his dress uniform with the precision of a man preparing for the performance of his lifetime. Every ribbon was perfectly aligned, every crease razor-sharp. He'd rehearsed his words, prepared his evidence, and gathered his allies. Today, he would finally rid himself of the thorn that had been Rachel Torres. Rachel went through her usual morning routine, unaware that her life was about to change forever. Coffee at exactly 8:47, the familiar touch of her dog tags, the drive to base with $847 in loose change rattling in her console. She'd been assigned to kitchen duty for the inspection, another of Webb's deliberate humiliations designed to keep her away from anything that might showcase her abilities. As she prepared vegetables in the mess hall, she could hear the growing crowd outside. Hundreds of soldiers forming up for the ceremony, their voices creating a low murmur of anticipation. She touched her dog tags reflexively, tracing the familiar numbers, anchoring herself to the weight of memory they carried. General Hayes arrived at her office before dawn, her secure phone ringing with updates from Washington. The pieces were in place, the authorities notified, the evidence compiled. But she knew that what happened next would depend on timing, on reading the situation correctly, on being ready when Webb finally revealed his hand. "Ma'am," her aide knocked softly on the door. "General Morrison just landed. He's requesting a private briefing before the ceremony." Morrison. Hayes felt a surge of relief. If anyone could understand the weight of what Rachel carried, it would be David Morrison. He'd been there, in the dust and chaos of Helmand Province, when the 847 medical response team had worked their miracle. The two generals met. In Hayes' office, the door locked and security engaged. Morrison looked older than his years, his face marked by the kind of lines that came from carrying too much responsibility for too long. "Patricia," he said without preamble, "I need to know you're absolutely certain about this. If we're wrong, if Torres isn't who we think she is, we're going to destroy an innocent soldier's life." Hayes pulled out a classified folder, its contents stamped with security clearances that made Morrison's eyebrows rise. Operation Silent Angel David, 72 hours behind enemy lines. 847 lives saved. 6 medics gave their lives to make it happen. Morrison's hands trembled slightly as he opened the folder. The first photograph showed a young woman in combat fatigues, her face streaked with dust and exhaustion, her hands covered in blood that wasn't her own. Behind her, wounded soldiers lay on improvised stretchers, their eyes filled with the kind of gratitude reserved for those who'd pulled them back from the edge of death. "My God," Morrison whispered. "She was just a kid. 22 years old." Hayes confirmed. Specialist Rachel Torres, combat medic, 847 Medical Response Team. The only survivor of the ambush that ended Silent Angel. Morrison flipped through more photographs, his breath catching as he recognized faces from his own memories. "I was there, Patricia. Not at the aid station, but in the field. We heard the radio chatter, the desperate calls for medical support. By the time we reached their position, he didn't need to finish." Hayes had read the after-action reports, seen the aerial photographs of the defensive perimeter where 6 megs had made their final stand. "She never talks about it," Morrison continued. "Never claims credit, never asks for recognition. She just keeps working, keeps saving lives, keeps carrying the weight of what happened. And Webb wants to destroy her because she won't play his game, won't pretend that his version of military service is the only one that matters." Morrison closed the folder, his decision made. "What do you need me to do? Just be ready. When he makes his move, when he tries to humiliate her in front of everyone, I want you to tell them what really happened. I want you to give her the recognition she spent 6 years avoiding. And if she doesn't want it, if she asks us to stop?" Hayes considered the question, knowing that Rachel's greatest fear wasn't humiliation. It was being celebrated for surviving when others hadn't. "Then we give her the choice. But first, we make sure Webb can never hurt another soldier the way he's hurt her." The ceremony began at precisely 1000 hours. Hundreds of soldiers stood in formation, their dress uniforms immaculate in the morning sun. Visiting officials took their places on the reviewing stand, their faces appropriately solemn for the occasion. Webb positioned himself where he could see everything, his eyes constantly scanning the crowd for Rachel's blonde hair. He timed his attack perfectly. Maximum witnesses, maximum humiliation, maximum impact. Rachel stood with the other mess hall staff, trying to remain invisible in the back of the formation. She touched her dog tags exactly 847 times already that morning, each touch a prayer, a promise, a connection to the 6 souls who would never stand at attention again. The inspection proceeded normally for the first hour. Officials reviewed equipment, examined facilities, took notes on clipboards. Then Webb made his move. "Attention!" His voice cut through the morning air as he strode toward Rachel's position. The crowd shifted uncomfortably as he approached, phones emerging from pockets to record what was clearly going to be a confrontation. Rachel stood perfectly still, her face composed, her hands clasped behind her back. She'd been expecting this moment for weeks, preparing herself for whatever Webb had planned. "I have evidence," Webb announced, his voice carrying across the courtyard. "That Sergeant Torres has been falsifying her credentials, claiming experience she doesn't possess, hiding behind connections to avoid proper evaluation." He produced a folder, waving it like a prosecutor presenting evidence. "This soldier is a fraud, too soft to serve alongside real warriors. What kind of medic can't even defend herself against basic scrutiny?" The crowd murmured with discomfort. But Webb pressed on, intoxicated by his own performance. "Tell us, Sergeant Torres, what do those numbers on your dog tags mean? 8-4-7. Is that your participation trophy number? Your safe space designation?" He reached toward her tags, intending to rip them from her neck for emphasis, but stopped as a voice cut through the air like a blade. "Colonel Webb, General." Hayes emerged from the crowd, accompanied by a contingent of Pentagon officials. Among them walked a figure that made several veterans in the crowd straighten with recognition: General Morrison, his weathered face marked by scars from battles that had shaped the war. Webb didn't notice the sudden shift in atmosphere, too intoxicated by his own performance to recognize the trap closing around him. "Continue, Colonel," Hayes said smoothly. You were explaining Sergeant Torres's unfitness for service. Please, elaborate for our visiting officials. Webb obliged with enthusiasm, each word another nail in his coffin. He questioned her combat experience while Morrison's jaw tightened. He mocked her quiet demeanor while Hayes produced a tablet from her briefcase. He pointed to her dog tags again, sneering about meaningless numbers and false valor. And that's when Morrison stepped forward. The crowd parted instinctively as the three-star general approached Rachel, his eyes fixed on those three numbers etched in metal. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority and something deeper, profound gratitude mixed with old pain. 847, Morrison said, and Rachel's entire body went rigid. The moment of truth had arrived, and nothing would ever be the same. Morrison's voice carried across the silent courtyard with the authority of someone who'd earned every star on his collar through blood and sacrifice. That's not a serial number, Colonel Webb. That's not a participation trophy. That's the number of coalition forces and civilians saved by the 847 medical response team during Operation Silent Angel. The silence that followed felt electric, charged with sudden understanding. Webb's face cycled through colors like a malfunctioning traffic light as the magnitude of his mistake began to dawn on him. I should know, Morrison continued, his eyes never leaving Rachel's face. I was number 312. Chest wound, 70% blood loss, 6 hours from the nearest surgical unit. This woman and her team kept me alive when medical textbooks said I should have died. The revelation rippled through the assembled crowd like a stone dropped in still water. Phones that had been recording Webb's performance now captured something entirely different. The moment when a genuine war hero was finally revealed. Morrison reached up with steady hands, unpinning one of his ribbons, a Purple Heart, and holding it up for all to see. This medal represents the day I almost died in Helmand Province. The day the 847 Medical Response Team decided that enemy fire wasn't going to stop them from doing their duty. His voice grew harder with each word, aimed like artillery at Webb's crumbling position. 72 hours of continuous operations under siege conditions. 847 lives saved under impossible circumstances. And you stand here in your dress uniform that's never seen real combat, attacking one of the finest medics to ever serve this country. Webb attempted to speak, to salvage something from the wreckage of his reputation, but Morrison wasn't finished. The general turned to address the crowd, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd witnessed genuine heroism. Let me tell you about Sergeant Torres's weakness, since Colonel Webb seems so concerned about it. Her weakness is that she counts every life she saves instead of celebrating them. Her weakness is refusing recognition while lesser soldiers chase glory. Her weakness is touching those dog tags 847 times each day, once for every person breathing today because of her team's sacrifice. Hayes stepped forward with the tablet, its screen displaying classification stamps and redacted documents. Colonel Webb, would you like to share your combat record with the Assembly? Your time under fire? The lives you've saved? The questions hung in the air like grenades with pulled pins. Webb's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, his carefully constructed facade crumbling as the crowd realized they were watching a coward who'd built his career on attacking those who actually served. I have your complete service record here. Hayes continued mercilessly. 22 years of administrative positions, 0 combat deployments, 0 medical saves, 0 understanding of what real service looks like. Rachel stood perfectly still through it all, her face a mask of controlled emotion. When the crowd began to stir, when whispers of admiration and shock rippled through the ranks, she finally spoke. General Morrison and General Hayes, I appreciate your words, but they're not necessary. Her voice remained soft, but it carried clearly across the courtyard. Colonel Webb was doing what he thought best for unit cohesion. I don't seek punishment for him, only understanding. The grace of her response drew sharp contrast to Webb's cruelty, making his behavior appear even more petty by comparison. She turned to Webb directly, meeting his eyes with that same steady gaze that had watched 847 people choose life over death. The 847 aren't just numbers, Colonel. They're people with families, with futures, with dreams that almost ended in the dust. My team died ensuring those dreams continued. That's not weakness. That's the strength you'll never understand. Morrison's voice broke through again, thick with emotion. 6 medics gave their lives that day. Rogers, Patel, Washington, Chun, Murphy, and Gonzalez. They held the perimeter while Sergeant Torres, then Specialist Torres, performed medical miracles with dwindling supplies and enemy mortar dropping around them. He paused, swallowing hard. When evacuation finally arrived, she refused to leave until every patient was loaded. She was the last one on the last helicopter, covered in blood that wasn't hers, still checking vitals as they lifted off. His voice cracked slightly. She carries those tags not as glory, but as gravestone. 847 lives saved, 6 lives lost. That's the math she lives with every single day. The crowd's energy shifted palpably from spectacle to ceremony, from mockery to memorial. Soldiers throughout the formation straightened their spines, understanding they stood in the presence of something sacred. Not just a hero, but a living reminder of what service truly meant. Webb seemed to shrink with each passing moment, his cronies melting away like shadows at sunrise, leaving him isolated in his shame. His transfer orders would arrive within hours, a quiet administrative reassignment to a supply depot in Alaska, where his toxic leadership couldn't poison another command. But that was tomorrow's humiliation. Today belonged to truth. Rachel touched her dog tags one more time, the 848th touch of the day, and made a request that surprised everyone. If we're done here, I have patients waiting. Real medical work doesn't stop for ceremonies. The simplicity of it, the matter-of-fact return to duty, said more about her character than any medal could capture. Hayes nodded permission, and Rachel broke from formation with the same quiet dignity she'd maintained throughout her ordeal. As she walked toward the medical facility, something remarkable happened. One by one, soldiers throughout the formation saluted. Not the mandatory courtesy due to rank, but the genuine respect offered to someone who'd earned it in the hardest currency imaginable, other people's lives. 3 months passed quietly. Webb was gone, transferred to a remote posting, where his particular brand of leadership could do minimal damage. His replacement, Colonel Sandra Martinez, was competent without cruelty, professional without pettiness. The base ran smoother, but Rachel remained fundamentally unchanged. Same night shifts, same quiet dedication, same routine that has sustained her through years of carrying invisible weight. The only difference was the way other soldiers looked at her now, with a respect that came from understanding rather than ignorance. Today, she tended to Private Thompson, 19 years old with shrapnel wounds from a training accident. His hand shook as she cleaned the cuts, fear written across his young face. "Hurts like hell, doesn't it?" Rachel said softly, her hands steady as she worked. "Yes, ma'am. I'm scared it'll scar. That I'll look like ... double quotes." He trailed off, unsure how to finish. She rolled up her sleeves slightly, revealing old scars crossing her forearms. Scars tell stories, Private. Some worth telling, some worth keeping quiet. The question isn't whether you'll have them, but what you'll do with the story they tell. Did you get those in combat, ma'am? Rachel's fingers unconsciously touched her dog tags before she answered. I got these trying to save people who need it. Saving, that's all that matters. She finished bandaging his wounds with practiced efficiency. You're going to be fine, Thompson. The body heals. Just make sure when it does, you use that healing to help others heal too. The young soldier nodded, something settling in his expression. As Rachel moved to the next patient, she didn't see Morrison watching from the doorway. He came by monthly. Now, not for treatment, but to check on the woman who'd saved him. He wasn't the only one. Letters arrived regularly from the 847. Some with photos of children born after wars that almost claimed their parents. Some with simple thanks. Repeated year after year. Rachel read each one exactly once before filing them away, unwilling to let gratitude overshadow duty. But here was something even Hayes didn't know. Rachel had been quietly tracking down the families of her 6 fallen team members. Using her off-duty hours and her modest salary, she'd been funding scholarships in their names. Medical training for young people from their hometowns. Rogers, Patel, Washington, Chun, Murphy, and Gonzalez lived on, not just in her memory, but in the hands of new medics learning to save lives. She'd already sponsored 47 students. 800. More to go. Another number to carry. But this one pointed forward instead of back. Jennifer Blake found her in the break room one evening, hunched over scholarship applications with the same methodical attention she brought to medical procedures. "Rachel," Jennifer said, settling into the chair across from her. "Can I ask you something?" Rachel looked up, her expression guarded. The revelation of her past had made some colleagues treat her differently, with awe instead of acceptance, distance instead of friendship. "Why didn't you ever tell us?" "About Operation Silent Angel? About what you did?" Rachel was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing familiar patterns on her dog tags. "Because it's not about what I did. It's about what they did." Rogers held that perimeter for 18 hours with a bullet in his shoulder. Patel performed surgery while mortar were falling. Washington gave me his blood when we ran out of transfusion supplies. She gestured to the scholarship papers. "This is what matters. Making sure their sacrifice keeps saving lives, even now." Jennifer studied the applications, noting the careful attention to detail. The personal notes Rachel had written for each candidate. "How many have you sponsored?" 47 so far. "I'm hoping to reach 847 eventually." Full circle. That's going to take years. Decades. Rachel smiled, the first genuine smile Jennifer had seen from her in months. "I have time. And they deserve to be remembered properly." General Hayes discovered the scholarship program by accident while reviewing base financial records. The pattern of regular donations to educational institutions caught her attention, leading her to a web of carefully managed accounts and quietly arranged funding. She confronted Rachel in her office, laying out printouts of bank transfers and scholarship. "Awards. You've been funding medical training for 47 students," Hayes said without preamble. "Money that should be going toward your own retirement, your own future." Rachel's response was characteristically simple. "They earned it. I'm just..." "The delivery system. The families of your team members, do they know? The scholarships are anonymous. They know their loved ones are being honored, but they don't know by whom. It's better that way." Hayes studied the young woman across from her, understanding finally dawning. "This is why you stay quiet, why you avoid recognition. Because you see yourself as a steward, not a hero." "Heroes don't survive when better people die," Rachel said quietly. "But survivors can make sure the dying meant something." That evening, Hayes called Morrison with an update that left both generals humbled by the depth of Rachel's commitment to carrying her fallen teammates forward. "She's not just honoring their memory," Hayes told him. "She's extending their mission. Every student she sponsors is another life they'll save, another family they'll heal." "How long has she been doing this?" "Since she transferred here." 6 years of quiet service, 6 years of turning her survival into something meaningful. Morrison was quiet for a long moment before responding. Some people carry their ghosts as burdens. She's carrying hers as inspiration. Meanwhile, in apartment 847 on Pine Street, Rachel sat on her bed as midnight approached. Tomorrow she'd wake at 8:47, drive to work with exactly $847 in her console, tend to wounded soldiers who saw her as just another medic. They didn't need to know about Operation Silent Angel or the weight of the numbers she carried. They didn't need to understand the ritual that sustained her or the memories that drove her forward. All that mattered was that when they needed healing, she'd be there. Quiet, competent, carrying 847 reasons to keep serving and 6 sacred obligations to honor through action rather than words. Her fingers completed their nightly count, and she lay back, dog tags resting against her heart. Somewhere in Iowa, Private Coleman was learning to walk again on new prosthetics. Somewhere in California, a translator's daughter was starting medical school on a scholarship she didn't know came from the woman who'd saved her father's life. Somewhere in the darkness, 847 hearts beat on, unaware they were part of a prayer whispered in metal and memory, sustained by a woman who understood that true strength doesn't announce itself. It simply continues, measured in lives saved one touch at a time. 1 year after Webb's downfall, Rachel Torres stood in the same medical bay where her ordeal had begun, but everything had changed. The harassment was gone, replaced by genuine respect from colleagues who understood the weight she carried. The quiet dignity that Webb had mistaken for weakness was now recognized for what it truly was, the calm strength of someone who'd seen the worst humanity could offer and chosen to respond with healing. Dr. Martinez approached their station with a chart in hand and something Rachel rarely saw on his face, uncertainty. "Torres, I need your opinion on something," he said, his voice carrying the respect that had replaced the casual dismissal of months past. "We've got a complex case coming in. Multiple trauma from an IED simulation gone wrong. The injuries are ... significant." Rachel took the chart, her eyes scanning the details with the rapid assessment that has saved lives in dusty aid stations half a world away. Her fingers unconsciously touched her dog tags as she processed the information. "How many wounded?" she asked. 6 soldiers, various degrees of trauma. "It's going to require all hands, and..." He paused, his expression troubled. "The lead surgeon is requesting you specifically. Says he needs someone who's worked under pressure before." The irony wasn't lost on Rachel. 6 wounded soldiers, the same number as her lost team members. She nodded, already mentally preparing for the work ahead. "When do they arrive?" 20 minutes. Rachel moved through her preparations with practiced efficiency, laying out instruments, checking supplies, ensuring everything was ready for the controlled chaos that was about to descend on their usually quiet facility. Other medics watched her work, noting the calm competence that seemed to emanate from her like a physical force. The helicopters arrived with the distinctive thump of rotors that sent Rachel's mind racing back to Helmand Province. For a moment, the fluorescent lights of the medical bay flickered and became the harsh sun of Afghanistan. The antiseptic smell was replaced by dust and cordite. She closed her eyes, touched her dog tags 847 times in rapid succession, and pulled herself back to the present. This was Fort Braxton, not a forward operating base. These were training. Injuries, not combat wounds. Her team was alive, working beside her, not lying still under desert stars. When she opened her eyes, the first wounded soldier was being wheeled through the doors. The next 4 hours blurred together in a symphony of controlled urgency. Rachel's hands moved with supernatural precision, her voice calm and steady as she coordinated with the surgical team. She anticipated complications before they arose, suggested procedures that saved precious minutes, and maintained the kind of focus that made everyone around her perform at their highest level. When the last patient was stabilized and transferred to recovery, Dr. Martinez found her in the supply closet, quietly restocking instruments with the same methodical care she brought to everything. "Torres," he said, his voice filled with something. "Approaching awe, what you did in there. I've never seen anything like it. Where did you learn to work like that?" Rachel's fingers found her dog tags, tracing the familiar numbers. "I had good teachers," she said simply. But Martinez wasn't satisfied with the deflection. "The way you handled the arterial bleeding on Thompson, the pneumothorax repair on Williams, those weren't textbook procedures. That was field improvisation at the highest level." "Sometimes you work with what you have," Rachel replied, her voice carrying the weight of experience that couldn't be taught in medical school. Later that evening, as Rachel sat in her apartment going through scholarship applications, her phone rang. The number was familiar. General Morrison, who'd made these monthly check-ins part of his routine. "Rachel," his voice carried warmth mixed with concern. "I heard about today. 6 soldiers, all stable, all going to make full recoveries. Doctor." Martinez called it the best emergency response he'd seen in 20 years. "They had good doctors," Rachel deflected. "They had you," Morrison corrected. "And speaking of having you, I've been thinking about our conversation last month. About the scholarship program, about carrying the mission forward." Rachel set down her pen, giving him her full attention. "What if I told you there was a way to expand what you're doing? To honor Rogers, Patel, Washington, Chun, Murphy, and Gonzalez on a scale that could touch thousands of lives?" "I'm listening." "The military is establishing a new medical training program. Combat medic preparation for real-world scenarios. They need someone to design the curriculum, someone who understands what it really takes to save lives under impossible conditions." Rachel was quiet for a long moment. "General, with respect, I'm not the right person for that kind of recognition." "This isn't about recognition," Morrison said firmly. "This is about making sure that future medics have the training your team never got. About turning your experience into a legacy that could prevent other teams from facing what you faced." The weight of the offer settled over Rachel like a familiar burden. She could see it clearly. Young medics learning not just procedures, but the kind of mental fortitude that kept hands steady when mortar were falling. Training that could give them the tools to save 847 lives without losing 6 of their own. The program would be called the Silent Angel Initiative, Morrison continued. "Named after your operation, funded by the scholarships you've already established, and designed to ensure that no medic ever has to choose between saving lives and protecting their team." Rachel closed her eyes, touching her dog tags one more. Time: 847 touches for the day. Each one a life saved, a family preserved, a future made possible. "When would this start?" she asked. "As soon as you say yes." That night, Rachel made a decision that would change everything. She wrote letters to the families of her 6 fallen teammates, not anonymous scholarship notifications, but personal messages explaining how their loved one's sacrifice was about to save countless more lives. She wrote to Roger's mother in Tennessee, explaining how her son's courage under fire would be taught to future generations of medics. To Patel's father in California, describing how his daughter's innovative surgical techniques would become standard training. To Washington's wife in Georgia, detailing how her husband's selfless leadership would shape military medical doctrine. Each letter was a weight lifted, a secret shared, a burden transformed into purpose. The scholarship program would continue, but now it would be part of something larger. The Silent Angel Initiative would train medics not just to save lives, but to understand the sacred responsibility that came with wearing the uniform. 6 months later, Rachel stood before the first class of Silent Angel trainees, her voice steady as she addressed young men and women who reminded her of herself at 22. The numbers on my dog tags represent 847 lives saved and 6 lives lost, she began, her fingers unconsciously touching the warm metal. Your job is to make sure those numbers never represent a choice. You will learn to save lives without sacrificing your teammates. You will understand that every person you treat carries within them the possibility of 847 more lives touched by your service. She paused, looking out at faces bright with determination and unmarked by the weight of impossible decisions. You will carry forward the mission of 6 medics who gave everything to honor their oath. Rogers, Patel, Washington, Chun, Murphy, and Gonzalez didn't die so that heroes could be made. They died so that families could be preserved, futures could continue, and the work of healing could go on. Her voice grew stronger with each word, carrying the authority of someone who'd earned the right to speak of sacrifice and service. When you graduate from this program, you won't just be medics. You'll be guardians of life, protectors of possibility, and carriers of a mission that extends far beyond any single battlefield. She touched her dog tags one final time, not as ritual or remembrance, but as acknowledgement of a burden finally shared. The 847 will continue to grow, not because of what I did, but because of what you'll do. Each life you save will save others in turn. Each family preserved will touch generations. Each choice you make to heal rather than harm will echo forward into a future we may never see, but will always have helped create. As she looked out at the new generation of medics who would carry the Silent Angel mission forward, Rachel Torres finally understood what Morrison had been trying to tell her for years. She wasn't just a survivor carrying ghosts. She was a bridge between sacrifice and service, between memory and mission, between the 847 who lived and the countless more who would live because of what she'd learned in the dust and chaos of Helmand Province. The numbers on her dog tags would always represent lives saved and friends lost. But now they also represented something else, the beginning of a legacy that would echo through generations of healers who understood that true strength isn't measured in the enemies you defeat, but in the lives you preserve. In the quiet of her apartment that night, Rachel completed her nightly ritual for the last time. 847 touches, each one a name, a face, a future made possible. Tomorrow, she would begin teaching others to carry that weight, to transform it into purpose, and to understand that sometimes the greatest victory is measured not in battles won, but in the endless, quiet work of healing a broken world, one life at a time. The Silent Angel Initiative would graduate its first class in 18 months. By then, Rachel's scholarship program would have funded its 100th student. The ripple effects of 6 deaths and 847 lives saved would continue expanding, touching families and communities in ways that could never be fully measured. But in the end, the numbers mattered less than the understanding they represented. That service is measured not in recognition received, but in responsibility accepted. That true heroism isn't about surviving when others fall, but about transforming survival into purpose, memory into mission, and the weight of loss into the strength to keep saving lives. Rachel Torres closed her eyes, dog tags resting against her heart, and for the first time in 6 years, she slept without counting. The mission continued, carried now by hands that had learned to heal, voices that understood sacrifice, and hearts that beat with the quiet determination to ensure that no life lost in service would ever be forgotten, and no life that could be saved would ever be abandoned. The 847 had become infinite, and their guardian had finally come home. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.